On the warm evening of May 9, 2015, Houston, Texas, played host to something far more primal than the usual spring baseball game. Minute Maid Park, a stadium normally filled with the sharp crack of a bat and the cheerful swell of organ music, was about to transform into a place where leather and bone met under the unforgiving gaze of thousands. That night, its familiar diamond and outfield were hidden beneath bright lights and a square ring, a sacred patch of canvas destined to hold an encounter that would be remembered not just for its violence, but for the way it unfolded, like a hunt, like a trap, like a statement carved into boxing history. Over 31,000 fans filled the stands, the largest indoor crowd for a fight in Texas at the time. From the upper decks to ringside, the air was thick with anticipation, colored by the red, white, and green of the Mexican flag. Voices joined together in a rhythmic chant, "Me 11 Co, Me 11 Co," the syllables pounding like war drums. The sound rolled over the stadium, bouncing off steel beams and echoing across the faces of two fighters about to walk into the fire from opposite ends of the emotional spectrum. One would enter with the measured calm of a predator who knows he can outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast his prey. The other would charge in like a berserker in the heat of battle, all instinct, all ferocity, willing to burn himself down if that's what it took to score a kill. This was not a stylistic matchup built on subtlety. It was a recipe for violence. And Canelo Alvarez, the 24-year-old star from Guadalajara, was not planning to spend the night running. Across from him, James Kirkland carried himself like a man who had been forged in chaos and had learned to thrive there. They called him the Mandingo Warrior, a moniker as raw as his fighting style. His reputation preceded him, 32 wins, 28 by knockout. His fists were like sledgehammers, his attack patterns unpredictable, and his mindset just shy of unhinged. But what made Kirkland truly dangerous was not just his power, it was the volatility in his nature, a combustible mix of aggression, toughness, and disregard for his own well-being. Kirkland's story was one marked by hard roads and harder lessons. Twice he had served time in prison, once for armed robbery, another time for illegal possession of firearms. Those stints didn't just interrupt his career, they shaped his outlook. Inside the ropes, he fought like a man who'd already faced consequences harsher than anything an opponent could dish out. At his best, particularly under the training of the legendary and Wolf, he became something beyond a fighter. He became a machine of destruction. Wolf was infamous for her brutal conditioning programs, routines that turned men into juggernauts both physically and mentally. She pushed Kirkland to a level where his stamina seemed endless and his ferocity unbreakable. But on this night, Wolf was absent from his corner. For reasons of circumstance and timing, the woman who could mold him into his most dangerous self wasn't there. In the sport of boxing, where the margins between victory and defeat can be as thin as a split second, that absence mattered. Alvarez, by contrast, entered this fight with momentum and confidence. A former junior middleweight champion, he had just signed an exclusive deal with HBO, a platform that would broadcast his rise to a wider audience. For many fighters, a debut with a new network is handled with caution. Pick a manageable opponent, look good, and don't take unnecessary risks. Alvarez ignored that playbook entirely. Instead, he selected one of the most feared brawlers available. In choosing Kirkland, he sent a message, to HBO, to fans, and to the rest of the boxing world, that he was not looking for easy nights. When the opening bell rang, there was no feeling out period. Kirkland came forward like a man possessed, fists pumping, shoulders hunched, eyes locked on his target. There was no jab to measure distance, no circling to gauge reactions. He sprinted across the small gulf between them and began throwing punches with the urgency of a man trying to break down a locked door. Alvarez found himself backed into a corner within seconds, his gloves high, absorbing shots on arms and shoulders, occasionally taking one clean to the head. Kirkland was trying to drown him in volume before he could find his rhythm. The flurry was wild but dangerous. Kirkland's hooks slammed into Canelo's guard with thudding force, uppercuts grazed the chin, and overhands whipped past the temple. The crowd roared at the sheer audacity of it. This was not a man easing his way into the fight. This was a man trying to win it in the opening minute. But Alvarez did not panic. Beneath the storm of leather, he was watching. He noted how Kirkland squared his shoulders when throwing the right, how he dropped his left hand after a hook, and how he leaned forward just a fraction too far when loading up on body shots. Every slip of the head, every subtle roll of his shoulders, was part of a silent calculation. He was downloading data, and though Kirkland had the advantage in raw output, Alvarez's edge was in precision and patience. Then, almost without warning, the momentum shifted. Canelo pivoted off the ropes, creating a sliver of space, and fired a perfectly timed straight right. It landed flush on Kirkland's chin, snapping his head back and freezing his legs. The Mandingo warrior, still throwing a moment earlier, suddenly sagged and fell to the canvas. The noise from the crowd swelled into a deafening roar, the chant of Mexico now triumphant. Kirkland rose at the count, but his footing betrayed him. His legs were stiff, his balance off. Alvarez, reading the moment, didn't rush in recklessly. Instead, he stalked, circling, measuring his man. He began mixing his shots, hooks to the ribs, jabs to the forehead, and right hands to the temple. Kirkland kept swinging back, but the edge of desperation had crept into his offense. His earlier storm looked less like a winning plan and more like a gamble that had failed. The first round ended with Kirkland retreating slightly, his breathing heavier, his guard looser. In his corner, instructions were barked, and ice was pressed to his neck. Across the ring, Alvarez sat calmly, barely breathing hard, listening to his trainers with the serene confidence of a man who felt the fight was already his. When the second round began, Kirkland came forward again, but the violence was now tinged with urgency. He wanted to make the fight chaotic, to drag Alvarez into a trench war where skill mattered less than will. 4 stretches, it worked. They stood chest to chest, trading blows that would have ended the night for lesser men. Kirkland swung wide hooks, trying to club his way back into control. Alvarez responded with crisp combinations, short uppercuts inside, and vicious body shots that thudded like a drumbeat. The exchanges were ferocious. The crowd was on its feet, not sure which way the fight would break but reveling in the spectacle. Kirkland, to his credit, absorbed clean shots that would have folded others and still came forward. But Alvarez's shots had a different weight to them, shorter, sharper, and more efficient. Midway through the round, a right hand from Canelo landed so cleanly that Kirkland's knees buckled again. He recovered, but the impact was visible in his eyes. As the round wore on, the pace began to tell. Kirkland's punches lost their snap, his guard began to drift, and his forward motion became a little more plodding. Alvarez, by contrast, looked as fresh as he had in the first minute, still slipping shots, still firing counters with precision. When the bell ended the round, Kirkland trudged back to his corner slower than before. The third round began with a sense of inevitability. Canelo pressed forward now, his movements fluid, his punches coming in purposeful flurries. Kirkland still tried to meet him head-on and still tried to impose his will, but each exchange was now tilted heavily in Alvarez's favor. Then, the decisive moment arrived, and in the midst of a close exchange, Alvarez dipped slightly, creating a subtle angle, and launched an uppercut that exploded upward with perfect timing. The punch landed squarely, snapping Kirkland's head back violently and lifting him off his feet. The crowd erupted as he tumbled to the canvas for the second time. For a moment, it seemed impossible that he would rise, but somehow, through instinct or sheer will, he got to his feet. The referee signaled the fight to continue, but the end was near. Alvarez stepped forward, cutting off the ring, backing Kirkland toward the ropes. He feinted, then dipped his shoulders and uncorked a final overhand right with the force of a sledgehammer. The punch landed flush. Kirkland's body went limp before he even hit the canvas, collapsing in a heap. This time, there was no count. The referee waved it off instantly. The knockout was devastating, the kind that replays in the mind long after the night is over. Kirkland lay motionless for several moments, attended by his corner and medical staff, while Alvarez stood in the center of the ring, his expression calm, almost serene. He had faced the firestorm and emerged untouched, the hunter who had allowed his prey to come close enough to strike before ending the pursuit with cold precision. It was more than just a victory. It was a declaration of intent. In 3 rounds, Canelo Alvarez had taken one of boxing's most dangerous brawlers and dismantled him with a blend of composure, accuracy, and brutal finishing power. He hadn't merely survived Kirkland's early onslaught, he had absorbed it, learned from it in real time, and used that knowledge to end the fight in spectacular fashion. The crowd's chants rose again, "Me 11 Co, Me 11 Co," not as a call to battle this time, but as a salute. The HBO cameras captured every angle of the final blows, replay after replay showing the precision of the uppercut, the final right hand that landed with such force it seemed to shut down Kirkland's entire system. In those images, Alvarez wasn't just another fighter earning another win. He was the embodiment of Mexican fighting pride, a man blending the country's famed body-punching tradition with sharp counterpunching and the ability to finish a fight with a single shot. For Kirkland, the loss was a harsh reality. He had walked into the ring with the aura of an unstoppable brawler, a man whose raw aggression could break anyone's will. But against Alvarez, that approach had been turned against him. His pressure became a liability, his lack of defensive layers an open door for Canelo's counters. Without Ann Wolfe in his corner, without the conditioning and tactical sharpening she provided, he would have been a half-step slower, a half-second more predictable, and in boxing, those margins are fatal. For Alvarez, the night was a launchpad. This was not just a win, it was a signal to the boxing world that he was not simply a careful technician or a cautious points fighter. He was a finisher, a man who could stand in the pocket with a brawler and not just survive but thrive. It marked a turning point in his career, one where the talk of him being the next big thing gave way to recognition that he already was. As the lights in Minute Maid Park dimmed and the crowd slowly dispersed, the memory of the fight lingered. Fans left buzzing about the knockdowns, about the suddenness of the finish, and about the way Canelo had walked through fire and emerged without a scorch mark. Boxing purists admired the patience and precision. Casual fans loved the drama and violence. And somewhere in between those reactions was the truth, that on this night, in this stadium, Canelo Alvarez had delivered a masterpiece.